Hello everyone, how are you today? So, for today's lesson, we're going to learn about the elements of art. So for our lesson objectives, okay, first, of course you have to identify the different elements of art. Second one, analyze the elements of art in producing one's art and crafts inspired by the arts of Luzon. For the third one, you have to create crafts that can be locally assembled using the local materials. Okay, so let's start. So, the elements of art are a lot like the ingredients of a recipe. It's basically all of the things that we need to put together in artwork. So for an actual definition, the elements of art are the building blocks of art. Another analogy we could think of is kind of like in chemistry. The chemical elements like oxygen and nitrogen and carbon, those are the building blocks of life. Those are the smallest pieces of our universe that could have put everything together and create new things. So in art, the elements like line, color, value, shape, texture, those things are the smallest elements that we have in artwork. And we put those together to create an artwork. So let's talk about our first element of art, line. So a line is something we're very accustomed to. We write with it, we draw with it, but simply, put a line is a mark with length and direction. So what are some words that we can use to describe some different types of lines? Let's look at this image by Jean-Michel Basquiat and see what kinds of lines that we can find. You might see some straight lines, there's curvy lines, there's jagged lines, there's hatch lines where we see multiple lines kind of in a row, there's scribbly lines, there's zigzag lines, we've got kind of curlicue lines, and even some drippy lines. So we can use all kinds of adjectives to describe lines in artwork. Our next element is value. This is not about how expensive your things are, but this is a different type of value. So in art, value is the lightness or darkness of something. So is it black, gray, white? Those aren't values. How light or dark things are. So here we see an example of some value scales. So a scale of values would just be going from light to dark or dark to light. So value just tells us whether things are light or dark or something in the middle. And that leads us into our next element of art, which is color. So how do we see color? This is kind of a science question. What we need in order to see color is a light source to shine its beautiful rays down, and it's going to hit an object, whatever that may be, and that spectrum, the light spectrum, if you remember, white light is a combination of all colors put together. So as that white light shines down onto an object, parts of that spectrum bounce back. So the parts that bounce back end up in our eyes, and then all of those cones and rods do all their little sciencey stuff and interpret the color, and it sends all of those little brain waves to us, and it's like, oh, hey, that's a color. So let's simplify that a bit. I'm not a scientist clearly, but color is basically seen by light reflecting off of an object. So that's a lot easier, right? Okay. So what are some words that we can use to describe different colors? First of all, hue. So hue would be the name of the color. Things like red or blue or green or turquoise. So the next word that we can use to describe colors would be intensity. So intensity is either the brightness or the dullness of a color. We can also call this saturation. So if a color is really intense and vivid and bright, then it would be very saturated. If it's very dull and dingy, it would be desaturated. So it would not have a lot of intensity to it, but when we look at artwork, we can use all kinds of different adjectives to describe colors. Now, let's talk about another element of art, and that is space. So, when we talk about space, we're not talking about outer space. We're talking about the space inside of an artwork. So, space in art would be the area around, above, or inside an object. Now, there are two types of space. There's a space that involves depth. So, how far things go back or forward in space. And then, there's also space that involves the shape of areas in an artwork. So there's positive space and negative space. When we talk about positive space, we're talking about the areas of focus. And those are the important parts of an artwork. So generally, the things that the artist wants you to look at first, that would be the positive space. Whereas negative space would be the space around the areas of focus, and that's usually the background of an artwork. So we're going to see a fun example of positive and negative space in a graphic design. So you may have seen the FedEx logo before. Some of you may already know what I'm about to say, but when we look at the logo here, so the letters themselves would be the positive space. So they're the areas of focus. However, the person who designed this logo did something clever with the negative space. So the way they arranged the letters and kind of put them together to create this logo ended up creating an arrow between the E and the X, as you can see right there. So once you see it, you can really unsee it, right? So what's clever about that is, arrows tend to imply motion, and FedEx is a shipping company. So when you look at this logo, your brain sees that arrow whether you know it or not, and it may subconsciously think to itself, oh, they must ship all things really fast. So their graphic designers are great. Another element of art is shape and form. Let's take a look. So shape would be on the left, form is on the right. So what's the difference between the two? Well, shapes are two-dimensional and forms are three-dimensional. So when we look at a shape, it has two dimensions. It's got height and width. Whereas a form has three dimensions. So it has height, width, and depth. That's the primary difference between the two. One is flat, one has volume to it. Now, there are two ways of describing shapes and forms, and that would be the terms geometric and organic. Now, let's talk about our last element of art for today, and that is texture. So what is texture? It's how something feels or appears to feel. Now, there are two categories of texture. First is actual texture, and that's texture you can actually feel. So for example, if I were to touch my shirt, it feels soft, right? Or if I were to run my hands across sand on a beach, it's going to feel kind of gritty. Or maybe I'm playing with slime and it's gonna feel squishy and slimy. So that's how things actually feel. Now, a lot of times in two-dimensional arts, especially, we have something called visual texture. And that is texture you can see but you can't feel. We also call this implied texture. So we're implying that it feels like something, but it doesn't actually feel that way. So I'm going to give you a pop quiz. This is an artwork by Damien Hirst. It is a diamond-studded human skull. Quite a bit of morbid, also quite a bit expensive. Now, is this skull visual or actual texture? It's actually a trick question. It's a visual texture because we can see the sharp of B and hard textures of those diamonds, but if we try to touch it, we actually feel the smoothness of the screen in front of us. Oh, I got you. But if you're really actually in the gallery where it's displayed, you could actually feel, but you'd probably get escorted out in handcuffs if you did. So, moral of the story, it's visual texture. You can see it, but you can't feel it. So that's all. So that's all I have for you for the elements of art. Hopefully, you learn some valuable vocabulary that you can use in our next discussion with your classmates. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.